While people are filtering in for the speakers, if you could, when you're not presenting, turn off your camera and mute yourself. And then, of course, once we go into the discussion section, we can all have our cameras on and our microphones on.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for our second free webinar brought to you by the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center. My name is Byron Kamenek. I am the Executive Director of the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center. With me, we have Christopher Toy, who recently left our nonprofit, but is still working with us on putting together webinars. He is a PhD candidate with the Colorado State University, working on agrivoltaics research here at Jack Solar Garden. Also part of our team is Allison Jackson, who is an education specialist working with me to provide opportunities to high school students to come out to Jack Solar Garden to learn more about agrivoltaics, as well as working with me on agrivoltaics policy, looking especially into different county regulations on siting solar on farmlands. Alexandra Hankins is our fundraising and events coordinator. If you have interest in tours or having events or supporting what we're doing here at the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center, feel free to reach out to me or Alexandra. You can find our information on our website. We have a new hiree, Liz Voss, that is helping out with admin. And so if you have any questions, if you reach out to info@coloradocoagrivoltaic.org, you'll be able to reach Liz. Today with us, we have Kara Heckert of the American Farmland Trust, who is a resilient agriculture West advisor. Duncan Gilchrist from the Nature Conservancy, Climate and Natural Resources Policy Associate. And also Jordan Beezley, who is from the Colorado Department of Agriculture, the Deputy Commissioner of External Affairs. Today we'll be talking about agrivoltaic policy here in Colorado and further afield, especially in regards to the Senate bill that passed what was that? Last month, back in May. But first, to tell you a little bit about our nonprofit. We're a small team, but we're trying to provide as much information to the public as we can about the potential of agrivoltaics so we can improve land stewardship within solar arrays across Colorado and further afield. We focus on three main areas, one being communities where we offer tours of Jack Solar Garden on a regular basis. Folks can come out on Saturday morning tours. Anybody in the public can sign up for a tour. We have corporate tours and special organization tours that can pick times during the weekdays that we can sort out educating different groups about agrivoltaics. As I mentioned, we do outreach to high school students as well as younger students to come out to Jack Solar Garden to learn more about the different microclimates created by our single axis tracking system that's elevated slightly into the air, so that folks can better appreciate how the solar panels can have impacts on vegetation, people, animals, and just the environment in general. Finally, we do education with policymakers as much as possible. When a county commissioner or a legislator is interested in visiting Jack Solar Garden, we provide those tours, provide ideas and thoughts on what other changes could occur within society to enable the rollout of agrivoltaics, being the co-location of solar above agriculture, not solar on one piece of land and far away being agriculture elsewhere. It is that co-location of these two things where the solar provides some level of benefit, some changes to the microclimates that enable different environmental conditions that have impacts on both vegetation, livestock, and people. Our small nonprofit, as I mentioned, has a variety of different offerings. We've recently done some happy hours for a company called Also Energy out here. We've had our very first workshop for solar developers about agrivoltaics just this past week. 20 folks from around the country came out to visit us. It was a 2-day event. We're looking to schedule another one, I believe, in mid to end of September. So if you're interested in coming out to Jack Solar Garden to have a solid 101 course in agrivoltaics and what we're doing, and learn more from researchers here on site, feel free to ping us to get that information once the dates are solidified, along with the schedule for how we'll be doing this. We have multiple resources on our website, various videos that we will continue to add to hopefully better or help to express what our researchers are learning here on site in terms that might be easier for folks like me to get versus reading a research paper about those topics. Plus continued animations, continued video, so everybody has an opportunity to learn more about what we're doing here at Jack Solar Garden. This is all important because it has impacts on policy. As I mentioned already, there was a Senate bill that passed here in Colorado that provided $500,000 towards agrivoltaic grants that I know Jordan will be able to speak a lot more to, so I won't steal more of his thunder. But talking about agrivoltaics, talking about this possibility of having improved land stewardship within solar arrays, providing access to people that wouldn't otherwise have access to lands within these solar arrays should be important, and it is. And it's wonderful that policymakers are taking note of this and trying to figure out what to do to help advance it. And so our speakers will be able to talk a lot more about that today. So if you have interest in this topic and you haven't come out to Jack Solar Garden for a visit, come out for a visit. Let's figure out how we can work together, how we can support having more education across our state as well as others to learn more about agrivoltaics and see how we can expand this opportunity to use lands within solar arrays that would otherwise go unutilized. I always like to show off our sponsors of folks that have supported Jack Solar Garden or supported the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center over the past few years, especially Walton Family Foundation with their generous donation that has helped really catapult us into the area that we're in now. So friends, without further ado, I am going to stop my share, and Jordan, if you wouldn't mind popping on, sir. And I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself more thoroughly, and feel free to start sharing your screen. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Byron. I'm just making sure that I get things popped up here. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here, and thanks for joining us today. My name's Jordan Beezley. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of External Affairs at the Colorado Department of Agriculture. And so in my role, I oversee kind of all of the state and federal policy for the department, as well as our state legislative activities and the strategic budget direction for the department. So just I want to start out kind of making sure that everybody's familiar with the mission of the Department of Agriculture, and it's really to strengthen and advance Colorado agriculture, promote a safe and high quality food supply, protect consumers, and foster responsible stewardship of the environment and natural resources. And one of our key goals for this year has really been working on advancing voluntary stewardship within agriculture. And as part of that, we do a number of different things and have a number of different programs. And one of those that I want to highlight today is our Acres 3 program, which is the Advancing Colorado's Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, which is overseen by Sam Anderson on our team, who's I believe is on the webinar as well today with us. So that's one of our programs that we use to support producers in adopting renewable energy in their farms and ranches. And in talking about kind of state policy, one of the first kind of specific mentions of agrivoltaics in statute actually came a couple of years ago in 2021 as part of the state's COVID-19 stimulus efforts. In that Acres 3 program, we got an infusion of about $3 million in funding there. And of that $3 million, $150,000 of that was specifically earmarked for agrivoltaics projects. That program also, though, does do a lot of other projects. So we don't focus just on agrivoltaics. We do a lot of work again, with energy efficiency and incorporating all types of renewable energy on farms and ranches and in the production process. Today, is going to talk a little bit about kind of recent policy changes at the state level. First one I want to talk about is Senate Bill 23092. This is known kind of as the Agricultural Producers Use of Agrivoltaics Bill. In this bill, kind of there's two key components in my mind around agrivoltaics. The first one was allocating the Department of Agriculture $500,000 specifically for agrivoltaic grants. As part of that, the bill, the legislature outlined some things that they wanted us to do with that funding. Specifically, they really put in a strong preference for us to fund new or ongoing demonstration or research projects to study both the benefits and the potential, the trade-offs of implementing agrivoltaics. And again, as part of this, we're going to be required to include in funding those projects, we're going to require the grantees to include findings on what those additional costs are compared to traditional photovoltaics. And as part of this process, again, this bill just passed about a month ago and just got signed into law, but we're working diligently to implement this. And we actually just had a call out for interested parties to join a stakeholder group to help us design this application process. So our hope is to get this grant process rolled out here very quickly over the next kind of couple of months so that we can start getting applications and get that money out into the field. Another component of the bill was related to agrivoltaics is actually a personal property tax exemption for the machinery and equipment that's part of essentially an agrivoltaic system. So on top of kind of having that grants piece, there is the additional tax exemption, which again is the design of that is hopefully to encourage and make it more financially feasible to implement agrivoltaics. Along that kind of tax discussion and the tax policy in Colorado, there's actually another bill that passed that also has the potential to impact the property taxation around agrivoltaics. That bill was Senate Bill 23303. This is the bill that will send a proposition to the ballot this November in Colorado. It's going to be Proposition HH, which will the proposition will essentially reduce property tax rates around Colorado. And within that, there's actually a specific provision that will create a new renewable energy agricultural land classification, which will essentially reduce the land property tax to a rate of 21.9% for that specific property that is used for both agricultural purposes as well as renewable energy purposes. And in order to qualify for that, the land had to be in agricultural production and use prior to installing that renewable energy on there. So that is a bill that, again, did pass the legislature, but because it has those kind of larger tax implications, that is going to the ballot in November. Again, this isn't in Colorado law at this point, but if Prop HH does pass, again, it will create this new valuation for the land in which agrivoltaics and other renewable energy incorporated into agriculture. So again, the idea with that is to further incentivize this and further bring down the cost to make it as equivalent to traditional photovoltaic installations as possible. So those are the new things that have happened just recently in Colorado when it comes to policy and policy changes. But I want to kind of just end with a couple of things where I think there could be more work done at the state level. One is I really think that we need a better understanding of the direct and indirect benefits to both the landowner and the community of solar as well as agrivoltaics. And I think that's some of the grant funding that we got this year will help us better understand that and communicate that to communities and get some of that good information. Another area that I feel is a barrier to implementation is really on the technical assistance side for producers. There's a lot of interest around adopting agrivoltaics, but at this point, there's not a lot of folks like Byron out there doing this work. And so I'm sure Byron will tell you that he is very busy, just talking with people, getting this information out there. And I think we really need more folks like Byron that can help other producers get through the process and figure it out and figure out what works for their particular operation. The other piece where I think there's a greater need where kind of the state could potentially step in is with more effective planning tools for local communities to really identify where it's appropriate for renewable energy installations, where agrivoltaics or other alternatives to traditional installation would be of a benefit to the whole community. And as we ramp up our development of renewable energy, I think this is going to become even more and more important. And then the last one is, I think we can better incorporate the indirect benefits, again, to the community, to the producers by keeping land in production, those local tax benefits into our regulatory and utility decision-making. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Byron.
Thanks much, Jordan. And for our participants, what we'll do is we'll take Q&A throughout the different discussions with Jordan, Kara, and Duncan. And then after all the presentations, we'll go ahead and answer them. But for our speakers, if there's any questions in the Q&A that you want to go ahead and just type in your answers, feel free to do so. Duncan, are you ready, friend?
Hey, yeah.
All right, go ahead and share a screen and please introduce yourself more fully than I did previously.
Okay. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, can you all see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, thank you all so much for being here, and thanks to Byron for organizing this. It's always I always try to not take for granted the fact that we have Jack's Solar Garden here in Colorado, advancing the state of knowledge and practice of agrivoltaics. So we're lucky to have Jack's here in our state where we all work, and also thanks to Jordan for his great presentation. There are some things in my presentation that are slightly duplicative of what Jordan presented, so I will skip over those parts, save us a little bit of time. So yeah, my name is Duncan Gilchrist. I work with the Colorado chapter of Nature Conservancy. My job title is Climate and Natural Resources Policy Associate. And I work to advance the Nature Conservancy's climate and conservation interests through state level policy. So this is a brief outline of my presentation. I'm going to briefly review kind of why the Nature Conservancy in Colorado is supporting agrivoltaics, a little bit about our agrivoltaic strategy, but then I'm going to spend most of the time hopefully talking about the recent bill that was passed, 2392. And then in a similar structure to Jordan, and with some considerations around future policies that we can and should pursue here in Colorado. So a little bit of background about the Nature Conservancy. We're a global environmental nonprofit. Our mission is to conserve the lands and the waters upon which all life depends. This is a brief overview of some of our work in Colorado. We work across a variety of program areas. So I'll just stop for a second and let you look at that. So the Nature Conservancy is working to address both the biodiversity loss and the climate change crisis. And, on the one hand, these crises are deeply interrelated. And as an organization that is working to address both of these challenges, we are often forced to confront the fact that in order to mitigate climate change, we have to deploy a lot of renewable energy very quickly to meet net zero targets. And the reality is that clean energy takes land, and some of the land that we will need in order to host the renewable energy infrastructure that will be required has high conservation value. And so, the Nature Conservancy, we're looking at this challenge with clear eyes? How do we deploy renewable energy in a manner that is consistent with our conservation objectives? And to answer this question, the Nature Conservancy has undertaken a multi-year, multi-region analysis called Power of Place. And the good news is that, one of the conclusions of this analysis, which studies the land use implications of various decarbonization scenarios across the United States, is that with careful and coordinated planning and robust community engagement, the United States can build the clean energy infrastructure needed for economy-wide net zero emissions by 2050, while avoiding most impacts to sensitive natural and working lands. And if you look down at the bottom left hand of the screen around this yellow box, I put a little box around policy recommendation number 5 that comes out of the report. And this is really where agrivoltaics comes in. The Nature Conservancy in this report has identified agrivoltaics as a really important strategy by which we can actually minimize the ecological impacts of the clean energy transition. This is just a quote from that report. Identifying the need for scaling agrivoltaics through policy. Oops, sorry. Okay. So in Colorado, our chapter has a strategy around agrivoltaics that involves both a pilot project that we're working on. We're lucky to be working with Byron and Jack Solar Garden on that, as well as a really nice array of other partners. And then we're also working to advance policies through the state level political system that advance this land use model. So just briefly about it, I just wanted to mention our pilot project. We're working to demonstrate a model for retrofitting existing ground-mounted solar arrays retroactively into agrivoltaics. A lot of times when we design agrivoltaic systems, they're sort of engineered to coexist with agriculture. This project is an experiment to figure out, can we grow plants within a fixed tilt solar array in a dryland environment that was, the array was not designed for agrivoltaics. And then, of course, like I mentioned, we're working to advance agrivoltaics policy through the state level political system with a variety of partners, including folks on this call. So this is the part I'll try to skip through because Jordan did a really good job of overviewing some of the core provisions in this bill. It's a big deal. It's really exciting that this bill was passed, especially in a year where the politics at the state legislature were challenging on a number of different issues, and we were lucky to have bipartisan support for this bill, which sort of gave it a sure path through the legislature. A brief mention around sort of what our role was. Legislation oftentimes requires a lot of different organizations working in different ways to advance an idea through the legislature. So, the Nature Conservancy's role is over the summer, we held a variety of stakeholder meetings with NGOs and developers, came up with a pretty big comprehensive list of potential policies, and then worked to integrate some of those policies as amendments in sort of collaboration with the bill sponsors. And then we did actually help the sponsors formally convene a stakeholder meeting after the bill was introduced to sort of reconcile some of the different ideas that stakeholders had around what should be incorporated into the bill after it was introduced into its first committee. So in my mind, sort of what came out of this legislative process, that there are two really important core provisions. Jordan did a great job explaining both of these. There's the personal property tax exemption and the grant program. I think, the personal property tax exemption, I'll go into this a little bit, but it's not perfect. I think there is a little bit of work to do to potentially tighten the screws around some of the standards that are tied to the incentive. So I'll briefly get into that, but yeah, I think in my mind, these are the two core provisions that came out of this bill that we should be excited about. So as we look forward, this is the end of my presentation too, and it's funny because it's structured very similarly to Jordan's, and I think actually his policy recommendations really are aligned with some of these as well, and so it's good to hear that a number of us are on the same page here. So I'll just briefly run through these. So I think I mentioned this, but I think we'll need to look at the stringency of the property tax exemption and potentially tighten some of the requirements. Ideally, there's a financial incentive that's tied to certain good behavior, and we want that good behavior to be, there to be a high bar for what developers have to do, but not too high that it's, a disincentive towards going for agrivoltaics. And so it might take a little bit of refinement to hit that Goldilocks zone where we're asking enough of developers such that like we're actually having the outcomes we want with respect to agrivoltaics deployment, but it's not so easy that it's just a sort of no-brainer and anyone can do it without any effort. So that's that. I think revising the agrivoltaics definition is something we consider in the state of Colorado. I think right now the definition that is included in 2392 is pretty broad, and that is good in some ways and not so good in other ways. We can go more into that in conversation if we want. I think we should consider establishing a megawatt target for agrivoltaics deployments in Colorado. I'm not sure if anyone from Lightstar Solar is on the call, but Lucy from Lightstar was a big proponent of this, and so I'll credit her for the idea. But it seems like a really good idea, right? Setting a target for deployment, like we want to have state agencies align around a common vision for deployment, and having a target can sometimes catalyze that coordination that's required. Fourth, I think this is a really big one actually. We have the ability to actually tweak the criteria that solar projects are judged by when they get bid into the competitive bid selection process in front of the Public Utilities Commission. So if we were to slightly change that criteria so that agrivoltaics projects we're more favorably received through that process, that would be a huge incentive for developers to pursue agrivoltaics projects. As Jordan mentioned, echoing him, there's definitely a role for the state to provide technical assistance, not just to farmers and ranchers that are interested in entering this field, but also potentially to local governments around helping local governments, modify land use code that promotes agrivoltaics. Also potentially some technical assistance to developers. There's a lot that we've learned about sort of configurations around technology and what works well and what doesn't. 6, just additional grant funding. This grant program is fantastic, but it will run out. And if you actually look at the costs of what are required to develop a really good, solid agrivoltaic system, it's a lot of money. And so the grant program was really important, but it will only get us so far. So we could reinfuse that grant program in future years. Then the state actually owns a lot of land in Colorado. So the state could itself proactively engage in demonstration projects on some of its land to demonstrate, what the state of Colorado thinks is important with respect to agrivoltaics. So I think that's an untapped opportunity. And then lastly, workforce development. So this is kind of similar to 5, but just apprenticeship programs to lower barriers of entry for new farmers entering agrivoltaics. So I'll stop there. Thank you all so much. Happy to chat, and Byron, thanks again for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thanks much, Duncan. Appreciate that. Kara's already ready. All right. I'll pass it over to you, and please feel free to expand on your bio and jump on in. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Byron. I'm really glad to be here and actually learn more about what's going on in Colorado. And hopefully my glare from my glasses isn't too much. They're new. I'm Kara Heckert. I'm the Resilient Ag West Advisor at American Farmland Trust. And I work on a broad spectrum of work to assist ag with resilience in several Western states. That spans everything from program development, fundraising, and policy work. I consider myself a proud generalist and kind of a special ops member of our solar team, which we have across the country. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start my presentation. So American Farmland Trust mission is to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. We were founded over 40 years ago. We have regional programs throughout the state and an office in Washington, D.C. We work extensively on the federal farm bill and through policies from kitchen tables to Congress, as we like to say, throughout the country, helping farmers stay viable. Now, I'm not sure if I know how to do next slide.
Maybe just clicking. They're not working.
That is not working.
Oh, maybe the space bar.
There you go. You can right click and click.
Oh,
next.
here we go.
There you go.
Highly complex.
Technology. You got it.
So today, AFT is addressing the growing climate challenge through 3 interrelated areas of focus. And I'm just going to stay at this real broad level for just a couple minutes, and then I'm going to get into some policy work around agrivoltaics that's happening in other Western states, namely California and Washington. So in regards to this and our climate strategy, first, we know that farming is and must be a key part of the climate solution. That means protecting our most important farmland. Protecting farmland also means promoting intelligent, compact urban growth to reduce farmland loss to sprawl and urban development. Secondly, we are promoting and accelerating regenerative agricultural practices. I won't go into what that definition is for us, but all sorts of soil health practices, water resilience practices. They're obviously essential to our national strategy on climate, and the healthy soils help boost productivity and improve water quality and quantity and increase the resilience of our farms. Third, which is what we're going to talk more about today, is advancing a regional national platform for smart solar. And we really expanded our work really in the last about year. We have, I don't know how many staff we have working across the country on our smart solar national initiative, but it's continually growing, and it's a really exciting and dynamic space to be. So for us, smart solar means working with the solar industry, empowering farmers, research, policy innovation, and collaborative strategies to ensure that rural communities are full partners in the transition to renewable energy. So getting that right means that we want to accelerate deployment of solar without just placing agriculture on the best farmland. And the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Future Studies projects that 10 million acres of ground-mounted utility solar will be needed to decarbonize the nation's electrical grid by 2045. And they expect that 90% of that is going to happen in rural communities. So the time is now. I'm going to talk a little bit next about our AFT Smart Solar Principles. So we have 4 different principles that we released earlier this year. These are our areas of focus, which also include agrivoltaics, which I'll go into further. First, we prioritize solar siting on buildings and land not well suited for farming. So we really want to emphasize solar energy development on rooftops, carports, irrigation ditches, which is starting to happen, in the West, especially in California, brownfields or other lands not well suited for agriculture, to help minimize the impacts of energy on our nation's best agricultural land. In the West in particular, we are, projected to lose several 100,000 acres of our most productive farmland in the next 20 years if we stay on our kind of business as usual trajectory. So that's always at the core of really everything that we do. Second one, safeguard the ability for land to be used for agriculture. So if solar energy is to be developed on farmland or ranch land, we want to make sure there's policies and practices that protect soil health, especially during construction and decommissioning, to ensure, viable farming in the future. Third, growing agrivoltaics, which we're going to talk about more today, for agricultural production and solar energy. We really think, as all of you do, that agriculture and solar energy can coexist if appropriate planning is undertaken. So we'll get more into that, but I'm not going to get into the definition of agrivoltaics with this group today. And the fourth one, which is really key, is promote equity and farm viability. So farmers in underserved communities should benefit from solar energy development. So we really encourage the inclusive stakeholder engagement process in our policy work, in new projects, and to ensure that we are strengthening farm viability and reflecting local farmer interests, including underserved producers that face barriers to accessing land and other resources. So with that, I'm going to kind of switch gears into some more specific policy approaches that are happening in Washington and California. The first one in Washington, SB 1587, really on the periphery of this as an organization. It's really in the preliminary stages. So AFT is watching it and supporting it. So in 2021, the Washington legislature passed the Climate Commitment Act, or CCA, which establishes a comprehensive market-based program to reduce carbon pollution and achieve the greenhouse gas limits set in state law. So the program started just in January 2023, and the first emissions allowance auction will take place in the second half of February 2023. So they recently, there was a state appropriation of over $10 million provided solely for the department to administer a pilot program to provide grants and technical assistance to support planning, pre-development, and installation of commercial dual-use solar power demonstration projects. So when I inquired with our Washington policy manager today, that's really the stage that it's at. The program is supposed to include eligible grant recipients, public agencies, nonprofit organizations, and federally recognized tribes. So keeping that at the broad level because that's about where it's at. The second one is something I've been intimately involved in along with other members of our solar team, and that is California's SB 688. So this is a bill introduced by Senator Padilla, which provides $20 million to convene a commission and provide grants to study the economic, social, energy, agricultural productivity impacts of agrivoltaics and agriculture on farms in the state's economy. And the latest and greatest news on this is that it just passed out of the Assembly Utilities unanimously yesterday. So that's exciting news. We really have been a big supporter of this at AFT. We've helped with bill amendment language. Byron's been really helpful in that to us as a consultant. We've engaged with other local partners in the sustainable ag space and in the development community to support this bill. California is expected to need 1 million acres for utility solar by 2040. We think this bill is a modest but important step forward. A couple more details on it. It really is looking at farmer interest and strategies for overcoming identified market barriers. And so it's really on the R&D level of things, and that's where we think it needs to be in California because there are so many unknowns. There's a lot of, as in a lot of places, a lot of skepticism about the scalability of agrivoltaics, but there is also a real need to look at solutions, especially with drought conditions and groundwater regulations that are potentially affecting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of acres of agricultural land that may need to be fallowed, and looking at how we can keep agriculture in farming and economically viable. So the other thing that we support about this bill is kind of the effective market alignment and incentives for agrivoltaics, including consideration of agrivoltaics as preferred siting for qualified community solar projects, and how they will accelerate innovations and adoption of agriculturally beneficial megawatt scale solar applications. So there's a lot more to this bill than that. We are dealing with a $31 billion deficit in California right now. It used to be 24, now it's 31. The California Energy Commission estimates a $300,000 budget annually for this bill to fund 2 positions and several million a year to fund the program. And the California Department of Food and Ag estimates a one-time $375,000 spread over 4 years to coordinate with the California Energy Commission on delivery of that. Lastly, I just wanted to talk about kind of broad and generally some other things that we support and would like to see with policy approaches. Just like in these programs that we're starting to see in the West and throughout the country, because we work in several other states and agrivoltaics policy and programs. I think that 5 or 6 states, maybe more than that across the country, introduce bills or have things going on in that vein this year. So obviously we support research pilots and demonstrations to fill knowledge gaps and keep a track record. We don't have a lot of Jack solar gardens around around the West or even around the country. So we definitely need more demonstrations and pilots of what's actually viable. We need strong locally driven solutions for what qualifies for support. for agrivoltaics projects, like incentives to increase viable, locally relevant applications. So incentives can come in many forms, as we know. We want to ensure that attention on agrivoltaics doesn't draw focus completely away from other important priorities in this space, like farmland protection. And lastly, we really are behind strong state level definitions for what qualifies. It's really interesting to watch what's going on in Colorado. The definition of agrivoltaics in California has been in debate over the last week on this bill that I spoke about earlier. And so comparing stories and definitions will be important moving forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Kara. Jordan, Duncan, and Kara, please go ahead and pop back on here. We'll get into some Q&A, and you know, it's funny to hear the themes between us all on this. It sounds like definitions are important and difficult to talk about, as that means that we'll exclude some people that don't want to be excluded and include some people that others may not think that they should be. I'm curious if anybody is willing to go down that path of talking a little bit more on the definition of, are there certain things that should be 100% included in agrivoltaics definitions and something that 100% should not be included in such definitions?
Seems like a good question for Kara, given her comment about participating in all these discussions recently.
And saying that she didn't want to talk about it.
Oh, true.
Well, you know, the debate in California as of last week, and Byron, you know a little bit about this because I sent you some emails. I definitely don't know if I can answer this question, but I think we'd like to keep it as broad and all-inclusive as possible. What was happening last week is, you know, a potential narrowing of the definition of maybe activities that were already happening to versus what could be more innovative and what could happen in other examples. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I
Diplomatically speaking.
Well, and just to go off of that,
Go for it.
I think as well, we need to be careful about the definitions because, you know, in states like Colorado, we have, you know, a wide variety of agricultural production. And as we're designing policies, I think it's really important that we ensure that all of those producers have the ability to access these type of programs and the ability to do this. And so, again, you know, I think the definitions are important. I think you can go too broad, but I also, you know, I think we just need to be very cautious about getting too narrow as well and excluding some producers that really do want to participate.
I can comment really briefly on that the main thing I've kind of heard some real controversy over, as far as if it falls under the definition, is should like pollinator habitat, for example, actually be included as agrivoltaics, because it's not a traditional agrivoltaic activity. You know, do we call it something like ecovoltaics, perhaps? And I think there's maybe some merit to that. I worry about the proliferation of jargon a little bit, but I understand the concern for sure, especially because it doesn't create jobs in the same way that agricultural activities do.
You know, without specificity in a definition, it just loses all of its meaning altogether. My 2 cents on this is that there needs to be multiple definitions. You have agrivoltaics in my mind, that is solar over agricultural land, be it as broad as the different types of agriculture like you're talking about, Jordan. And then if folks want to have solar mixed in with farmland that are separated from each other, maybe that's agri-solar, where you have solar on farmland, but it's not necessarily co-located on top of one another. And then you might have dual use, where it could just be, hell, anything. You could have a beer garden underneath solar panels or something along those lines. So maybe there's a need for having a variety of definitions, and then people can fall into those buckets as to what works best.
I like that approach too, because we're not gonna get there with just agrivoltaics, right? This is gonna have to be an all of the above approach, and so kind of clearly defining what those approaches are, how they meet various goals for renewable energy, for agriculture, for other land uses, for ecological purposes, and really kind of defining those clear paths of, hey, we have a lot of good and different options to achieving our renewable energy goals that aren't just traditional installation.
Well put. Well, thanks for delving into the definition a little bit with us, friends. Continuing down, it was I think, Kara, you brought up about skepticism towards agrivoltaics, and I wonder from all of you about how that skepticism can be overcome, from how to scale it and what that would be like. What types of policies could be used both at the local, state, and federal level that might help overcome or figure out the scalability of agrivoltaics.
I don't have a holistic answer, but I have a couple thoughts on that, especially as it relates to the West. And I know that you're doing some research and involved in some research in this space, Byron, but I feel like one of the things that I hear from farmers, or maybe more skeptical ag industry groups, and I just want to preface this with, one of the things I like about working on this topic is that I actually haven't had a conversation where somebody has been like, no way, no how. It's just like a healthy skepticism. So there's room here to still debate. And anyway, back to what I was thinking of is, I think unless we have some really good localized data around water savings as it relates to agrivoltaics, that's going to be really difficult for some farmers to buy into, especially ones that are undergoing, groundwater restrictions and having to fallow land. So I think the research that's happening in that space will be really important for local solutions. And scalability. I think a lot of it's economics, right? I think there needs to be more data, and maybe this exists and I don't know about it. There needs to be more data on the bottom line of, how can people stay economically viable with these kinds of solutions. We just don't have enough examples.
Need more examples. Okay.
Yes.
I can jump in with the next question. Jordan, in your presentation at the very end, you mentioned it seemed like the role of utilities in advancing agrivoltaics. There's been a handful of questions in the Q&A that play around with PUC or with interconnection and things like that. Could you expand upon your thoughts on how utilities commissions or utilities can be engaged with this?
Absolutely. And I'm also going to preface this with, I am not a utility expert. So, but I do think, when you're looking at, utilities that have mandates, or they have their own goals for installing renewable energy and getting renewable energy, they're often looking at solely at bottom line, right? And then, but there is the Public Utilities Commission, there's legislatures that have the ability to say, well, in addition to that bottom line, we also want you to consider these things. And I think a big component of that should be that utilities should be considering the other indirect benefits that, installations like agrivoltaics have. And so when they're making their calculations of what projects they're going to build and fund, there should be some additional incentive to fund those projects that have those additional ongoing benefits to that community. So that's one big area. Another area that talk about a lot in Colorado, and I think there's going to be further discussions about this, but is the net metering and kind of the limits on the amount of installation that can happen with various utilities in the state. And oftentimes that's a big hindrance to producers that do want to get into this area, and they do want to put installations, on their properties. Is they can do it, but then they can't connect, and they can't get credit for the energy they're producing. So there's no economic benefit there. So that's another area where I think, potentially, a body like the Public Utilities Commission or the state legislature could adopt policies to address that.
I'll share a little bit of my experience of when I was bidding in Jack Solar Garden to Excel Energy's community solar garden program. They had a variety of different evaluation criteria that they were looking for. And that evaluation criteria was along the lines of 40% of the price that I would sell my power to, or my renewable energy credits, I should say. Maybe 20 or 30% towards, have I built a solar array before? And when it was, I think about 20% that went towards, do I have access to land, or do I have it under contract? And then the last parts were, or I think 10% was, oh shoot, well, do I have the money to do it? Showcase that I have the finances. And then the last part was a little bit on low and middle income services. There was nothing about land stewardship in there whatsoever. So I've had different solar developers reach out to me and say, we're interested in doing agrivoltaics, but we're competing against people that don't have anything to do with land stewardship. So we're not going to compete using agrivoltaics because we're going to lose. So I take your point well. I'm curious. There was a couple of things that both Duncan and Jordan had mentioned in your presentations about refining the personal property tax exemption aspect. Would you all be interested in delving further into that, or talking about? I'd be happy to, or talking about the areas of what people should watch out for policies as people come up with policies across the country on agrivoltaics that may not actually be helpful towards those that are really interested in trying to get this done for helping farmers, as well as expanding the clean energy program that we have.
Yeah, I could try to frame up some thinking around the property tax exemption question, Byron. I think there's a lot of information that we don't yet have about how effective the property tax exemption that we just passed could be. We don't really know yet. I think, one of the challenges in that provision, which you and I have discussed, is that there's a kind of, the language is worded such that there's a long list of things that developers can choose from in order and incorporate into their solar array design that would qualify them for the personal property tax exemption. And on the one hand, that's a good thing because we want to encourage innovation. We want to encourage folks to incorporate a wide variety of different types of technological modifications to their arrays, so that we can understand, like, in what contexts, with what designs, agrivoltaics can work. On the other hand, again, like I mentioned, we don't want the bar to be so low such that they're really, acting in bad faith. A developer could do the lowest hanging fruit, modification possible, and get the property tax exemption, but not really be advancing the outcomes that we want to see with agrivoltaics, such as improved land stewardship or additional economic revenue or jobs being created from the array, or food production for the local food system. So I think I'll just stop there. That's kind of how I'm seeing it.
Anything to add, Jordan?
I don't have a lot to add in terms of specifics on that kind of that definition, but it is, I think this highlights one of the challenges when we're implementing, public policy, which is finding that right balance. And, you know, the way I view this is I think it's an ongoing conversation. You know, this is the starting place where, you know, this is the first time we've implemented this policy. This is what it's going to look like. Let's take a look at it. Let's analyze it. Let's see who's using it. Is it, you know, and is it achieving our goals? And if it's not, then let's work with our lawmakers to adjust it down the line. And I think that's really how we need to be viewing all of these policies, especially in an emerging field, is we're not going to get them right the first time. But we're going to do our best, and then let's analyze them and figure out how we can do better going forward.
Well said. Friends, would you have any questions for each other? I could keep rattling off questions because it was fun listening to you all. I've been thinking about this for a while, but I figured I'd open it up and see if any of you would like to ask each other questions about what's been going on, or if you have other thoughts that you would like to share now that, yeah, go ahead, Duncan.
So I have a question, and it's more of like a practical question, but I'm wondering if you all are interested in getting together at some point after this and talking some more about what's possible in Colorado and what we might want to see happen. I mean, I think we're pretty aligned with some of our policy concepts. So would love to chat with y'all further sometime after this webinar.
Definitely.
Always love to talk policy and work with all of you. And I'm sure there's lots of other folks listening in that would like to be kind of part of that. And I think that's an important piece of this is that, you know, as we're going through this and we're figuring this out, we need that input from others, you know, whether it's folks in the utility space, producers, you know, technical assistance providers, you know, all of the above. Again, I think it's going to be a big group effort.
I have a question for the Colorado people, which is all of you except for me. I guess more generally speaking, I'm just wondering what kind of farmer feedback you're getting about agrivoltaics and scalability, because I know what I'm hearing, but you know, there's thousands and thousands of farmers with different conditions. Every site is different. You know, you could never make one broad sweeping statement about all farmers, but I am curious about what's happening in Colorado in that way.
I can go ahead and start, and I'm sure everybody else on the call has talked to folks and got their own input as well. But you know, from my perspective, I think this also goes back to some of the discussion earlier about kind of just the general attitudes around agrivoltaics. And I've seen a tremendous shift in the past couple of years. When 3 years ago, when we were having this conversation in Colorado, you know, I think there's a ton of skepticism. I think that's starting to subside, and I think we see that with the excitement by both parties in the state legislature, you know, rural legislators that are in agriculture that are excited about this. They want to move this forward. And so I think there's always going to be a, you know, healthy skepticism by producers, as there should be with any new practice, anything that's coming forward. They should be closely analyzing it. You know, does this fit into my operation? How would this work? But I also think, you know, folks like Byron being out there, having an example where they're bringing people in has really broken down a lot of those barriers. And quite frankly, it's going to be folks like Byron and others that are actually doing it on the ground, talking to producers, that are going to convince other producers to do it. It's not going to be me or somebody else from the Department of Agriculture saying, hey, go do this. It's going to be their neighbor saying, I was successful at this. I made it work. I'm making more money. And so I see that as kind of where we're at.
I've found some of the folks that I've met with are from the older generation that have farmland, that are interested in leaving legacy behind for their kids and their grandkids, and see solar on their land as an opportunity to create higher lease rates for them so that they can share that with their family in the next 10, 20 years plus. But they also don't want their land going out of commission, and maybe nor do their children. Or maybe they're afraid that their children would sell off the land because there's no value to it other than the sale of it to them. So I've spoken to farmers and ranchers here in Colorado and a handful of other states about what it would be like to put solar on your farmland, how to adjust it so that somebody could continue using it, and at least creating a space for people to be able to use it, whether or not somebody's lined up immediately to do it. At least that space is available for the decades to come that solar array is in place. But if you build it in the traditional way of having it close to the ground, that land, if your grandkids choose to get back into farming, that land is no longer available. So those are conversations I've had with farmers and ranchers interested in their legacy.
Mhm.
One of the questions that we had near the beginning was about seeing how public-private partnerships can be engaged in this sector, especially around technical education programming through different government avenues. Does anybody want to speak to the potential of public-private partnerships here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the only way we're going to get enough technical assistance out there. You know, CSU Extension is great in Colorado. You know, we've got great staff at the department, but the reality is there's not enough of us to go around, to be quite frank, and there's a lot of other work that's going on. And so I do see there being kind of a good opportunity for public-private partnerships, whether that's, you know, with you know, for-profit consultants and providers, or nonprofits that provide kind of that technical assistance as well, and as well as kind of, you know, we see this in other areas of kind of peer-to-peer support networks. So I personally believe in kind of an, you know, in this type of thing, it's an all of the above approach. And not everything's going to work everywhere, and you know, there's not enough resources to fill the needs, so we got to draw on everything we can.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's much different than maybe more complicated, but anything you're trying to do on the land on a large scale is, like, I'm thinking of even like healthy soils practices. Like there's no way you're just going to be able to do it with just public investment. I think that's where NGOs can also play a really good role. And I'm not just saying that as an NGO, but bringing together the academic institutions and the state and federal government funding and the farmers, and web it all together. I don't think we would ever be able to do this or even imagine it without public and private partnerships. I put something in the chat, maybe it can be shared with everyone. It was just an example of one of the partnerships we're working with nationally with Edelin, and it's a good example of that to a certain degree.
You know, down that path, I'd be curious. There was a question in the chat about where else is the Nature Conservancy working on agrivoltaics in the country, but I'd expand that to the American Farmland Trust too. If you could share about if there's other agrivoltaic sites or other activities you're doing around the country that are pushing forward this agenda, we'd be interested in hearing.
Yeah, I didn't want to go too much into that in the beginning because I wanted to focus a little more on the West, and I'm certainly not going to do it justice. Ethan, our national solar director, would do it a better job of this, but we are really working kind of all throughout the country on policy, research, and outreach and education. I would say some focus areas are New England, particularly Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York. The Southeast is a big area of opportunity, the Midwest, the West, the Pacific Northwest.
Everywhere.
And it's almost everywhere. I don't know how many states it is. I know someone in my organization does, so I might get in trouble for this. But the other thing is some of the policy examples, like Massachusetts and some of the things happening in New York and New Jersey are really innovative and interesting to follow, a little bit in Illinois as well. So not quite everywhere, but quite a few places. We're more evolved in kind of the demonstration project arena back east. We'd really like to be more involved in research and demonstration out in the West. It's just we haven't to date. And there's limits to the funding that's available. I gotta add one more thing. We obviously have a big farm bill platform that just came out around smart solar. This is moving so fast, and that's part of the reason I'm bumbling through some of this today, is like things get released like last week or like a couple days ago. So we have recommendations in the farm bill around smart solar, and I could share those as well. So we're very engaged on the federal policy level too. Sorry for the long-windedness.
Duncan, TNC on agrivoltaics in other states by chance?
Yeah, you know, I think the Nature Conservancy is, we're not super active on agrivoltaics yet, but I think with the release of our Power of Place national analysis like 2 months ago, they really highlighted agrivoltaics as a key strategy that we can use to sort of ease the pressures to develop like pristine land for solar energy by way of enabling solar to be located on working lands. I think that, you know, since we've sort of come out with a position through a national analysis, I'm hopeful that our organization will, you know, continue to sort of build our strategy around agrivoltaics. And I think we have a lot to learn from the American Farmland Trust. I know we're collaborating with AFT a little bit on some of our national work. So that's exciting. And I hope to see more chapters embracing agrivoltaics.
There was a message in here, Jordan. I think this one is geared towards you, friend. Can you share more about the state's goal of creating more effective planning tools to identify where agrivoltaics are suitable, and how do different institutions get involved with the state?
Yes, that's a great question. This is my goal, and this is a need that I see out there, and I would like to see the state get more involved with. And you know, actually, kind of piggybacking off of what Duncan just mentioned, the tools that they've developed there around kind of analyzing, you know, the benefits of siting renewables in different areas. That's exactly the type of tool that I think we need, and we need to expand upon. You know, kind of how I envision it is, again, a tool like that, you know, we can create, that's available to local governments, that's available to local planners, available to landowners, nonprofits, that again have these different layers that we can take into account, you know, different things, the, you know, the ecological benefits of the land, the productivity of the land, you know, water impacts, you know, economic impacts, you know, that really incorporates all of this. And so it really just empowers, again, the individuals and then the local leaders to make those decisions that are right for their own communities. And so, you know, I see there being a potential role for the state and being involved in creating something like that, and or going on this public-private partnership. You know, why reinvent the wheel when there's other tools out there that we can expand upon? So, you know, I think it would be, from my personal opinion, I think the state should look at, you know, how do we support those efforts by others that are out there doing that? Because there's other organizations that are as well that are putting together planning tools around agriculture. And you know, so I would love to see kind of a combined effort, at least in Colorado, to put some of these tools together and collaborate on an approach that, again, is kind of a holistic approach to siting decisions.
We had a question in here, being curious about the federal level, and Kara, you had talked a little bit about the farm. Oh, okay.
Go ahead. All I can do is try or say I don't know. I'm always willing.
I know of the one bill that's being put into the farm bill, sponsored by a New Mexican Democrat and a Republican Indianan. I don't know a ton about that bill, but would you care to expound upon what you know?
You know, if you just give me a minute, I actually can provide you a little more context on that. Can we come back in just a second?
Sure.
There was a question that I thought was kind of interesting that I think was geared toward Duncan regarding the recommendation you gave for megawatt targets. The comment was somewhat critical, saying that they actually favor the utilities. And I was just wondering if you could comment on that and sort of, if you think that's possibly a valid criticism, if there's something that can be done to alleviate that while using megawatt targets, or what?
It's a great question. I haven't thought super in depth about this, I'll be honest. I guess the way that I'm thinking about a megawatt target is kind of how I think about something like an emissions reduction target that a state adopts. And when a state adopts climate targets, although in some cases the targets aren't actually statutorily binding, they do serve to motivate state agencies to get coordinated around an approach to achieving that target. So at the very least, it I think enables the state to be a little bit more proactive in pursuing agrivoltaics deployment. But I would defer to others too on the panel if they have any thoughts on this one.
Well, I just think what you said was interesting, because I think how I always viewed that was, kind of like a hard target that, the Public Utilities Commission says, utilities, you have to do this. And so I think when we're talking about it, I think, you bring up a good point that there's different approaches to this. There's kind of that hard approach of this is a regulatory requirement. And then there's that softer approach that we often use in government, which again is that planning tool, which is saying, hey, this is the administration's goal. We're trying to achieve, this emissions reduction, or we're trying to do this or that. And then that really does help us kind of coalesce around a single goal and bring various resources together to achieve that goal. And so I think there's different ways you can view that.
So Byron, if you want me to go back to your question, like I said, things are moving fast, but regarding that bipartisan bill that was recently introduced, the Agrivoltaics Research and Demonstration Act of 2023. So introduced by Senator Martin Henrich, who's a Democrat in New Mexico, and Senator Mike Braun, who's a Republican in Indiana. So the legislation, this is really exciting, because obviously to scale something like agrivoltaics, we need major federal investment. So this legislation would establish a framework for the U.S. Department of Ag to define and evaluate agrivoltaics to better incorporate the practice of pairing solar energy generation with agricultural production. And it would also authorize the USDA to create a network of research and demonstration sites. So the bill came less than a week after we released our recommendations to Congress about advancing a smart solar build out. We can provide a link to participants later if you'd like, Byron, but in essence, that's what it is. I think to date, our interaction, maybe I'll just editorialize here a little bit. Our interaction with USDA and NRCS is a very close partner of ours who we greatly value, and there are some states that we work in, like Texas in particular, that obviously is going to have a huge scale up of solar, already is, where they're actually funding a position for us to have a smart solar specialist to work with ag producers. There's other states where that's just not an area of focus, I would put it that way, or an area of knowledge. So it really depends on the state. So I think this bill hopefully will drive maybe a more uniform response at the agency, but that's hard with any national government agency or even nonprofit, right? A uniform approach across the country. So it's exciting news.
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
We had an interesting comment from Caleb about the thoughts around considering what products should and should not be within agrivoltaics. He mentioned down in Arizona, there are alfalfa farms that send their alfalfa to other countries. I remember reading about how alfalfa was water from the Colorado River, as I recall, is being used in Arizona to grow alfalfa for sale in Saudi Arabia. It's an interesting thought of should there or be different inclusions or exclusions on where the commodities or other crops within an agrivoltaic system should be gone if there's state or federal funding going towards it? I think this goes back to that definition.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think with any of this, I think you need to be very careful about how you think about this and how you go about those definitions, because, you know, an intent to try to do one thing and target a very specific thing, it's going to be very difficult to do that. And you would have to, again, be very careful with the definitions. But kind of from a broader perspective on this, you know, we at the Department of Ag, you know, we're not in the business of telling farmers what to grow. And situations can change, ownership can change. And so, you know, to me, that's kind of a slippery slope of going down that road. And, you know, it's something where, again, we're heavily focused on voluntary and incentive-based approaches. And, you know, I also would, you know, as we're thinking about these things, I'd also, you know, hate to really limit kind of our ability to advance agrivoltaics by saying, you know, by excluding a wide swath of producers, when you know that you know, potentially installing agrivoltaics or other types of installations on those properties could have a huge benefits in other areas. And that is I mean, this is a challenging thing whenever we're talking about public policy. Again, there's always going to be some trade-offs, right? And so we gotta, you know, one of the things that I think we have to do is kind of keep our eye on the ball of, well, what are we trying to achieve with these policies? And are we achieving that goal? And if we start straying off and saying, okay, well, we want to achieve this and that and that and that, in addition to, you know, advancing agrivoltaics, we're going to find ourselves in trouble, and we're going to find ourselves with policies that don't work.
I echo a lot of those sentiments. I think, especially as it relates to scalability and also how much farmland we're already losing and projected to lose, and keeping as much good land in agriculture as we can. I also understand the question and the concern about water, Colorado River water. I mean, 55% of the Imperial Valley's water is for growing alfalfa. So I get that, but I think definitely we share your sentiment, Jordan, about limiting things at this stage.
Well,
Yeah, just to touch on the water piece of it a bit as well. I mean, yes, you know, that is a huge concern for us, huge concern for the state, huge concern for everybody in the West. But a policy like, you know, excluding those producers from being able to participate in agrivoltaics programs, I don't think they're going to stop farming because of that. You know, they're going to continue to farm. So again, kind of limiting their ability to access these type of programs, I don't think would solve some of those other challenges we face.
Continuing down the water path, there was a question that talked about the need for conserving more water and the potential of agrivoltaics and the thoughts around water conservation, or I guess water conservation tax credits is kind of the way I was thinking of it, which also just leads me into conversations I think I've had with everybody here about the possibilities of working with conservation tax credits, not land conservation for either farming or for natural resource conservation, to be mixed in with solar array developments, given they're built in certain ways and there's certain effectiveness to that. I'm curious about your all's thoughts on the ability to use tax credits for conservation purposes, or through conservation easements, or anything else along those lines for working with agrivoltaics moving forward.
Help explain that a little bit more, what you mean about Well, I mean, that was broad. I knew where you were
It's too
going
broad.
until the end.
I started off down the water path and I changed it up. Yeah.
Yeah, with water, then it went to tax credits and then easements. But I mean, I think innovative solutions can mix all these things together.
Fair
I'm
enough.
not sure that I got you.
I can open it up to just however you want to respond to my diatribe right there about these things. I'm thinking of the potential of water savings in land that can help with regenerating land that might have the opportunities to serve the purposes of conservation easements, of keeping land useful for soil health regeneration, or for keeping land viable for farmers in the future, given how the solar array has changed. So you can talk about the water side more if you like to. You can talk about my side of conservation easements or tax credits on that, however you like.
Oh, I'd love to bring some other AFT people on the conservation easement tax credit side. I'm not going to claim to know everything that's possible there, but I could say broadly that I think innovative solutions, looking at the land, water, energy nexus, is really where it's at in the West. It's definitely something that I talk about all the time in this job. So how do you protect the most important farmland that has high groundwater recharge potential, is at high risk of development, and is supporting climate and renewable energy goals? So I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty very well here, but it would be really exciting to tie water benefits to agriculture in a more formal way. And we just don't, unless, like I said before, and we need more research and we need more, more discussion and more policy advocacy around that angle of it. I don't even know if I answered your question, Byron, but more later.
I'm not sure if I had a full question in there, so yeah, you're doing fine.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. There's a couple of things I wanted to touch on. Talking about kind of the interaction with conservation easements. Conservation easements are a huge land conservation tool utilized in Colorado, and I'm not an expert in this particular area, but I do know that a lot of the land trusts are working in Colorado are thinking about this and how do you incorporate language into your easements going forward in a way that can maintain their deductibility for federal tax purposes, for state tax credit purposes, and be able to do some of this. I think one of the challenges, though, that we have in this area is that we have a lot of easements in place and a lot of land already protected. And it was done prior to, contemplating this type of use. And so there's going to be a real challenge on those already conserved lands, and perhaps with those landowners that might be more open to doing something like you've suggested. So there might actually be a barrier there for them participating in something like this because they've already conserved their land in a way that doesn't allow for it.
Yeah.
So that's a whole area that
I mean, AFTs and agricultural land trust, we hold ag conservation easements in the state of Colorado and California and kind of all over the place. And there's definitely some really interesting things going on in Colorado from what I hear around groundwater easements. And I think you're exactly right, Jordan. I mean, I'd love to bring in my land protection team on this, but I think there are a lot of limitations to things that have already been locked in. Never say never, Byron. There's still a lot of land left in the West.
I leave that word out of my vocabulary. Yeah.
On the water piece, I'll just touch on that too. But I think there's huge potential there. And I think that's one of the areas that we really need to lean into on kind of our research as we're developing more demonstration projects to really understand that. Because that is that could be a huge driving force in Colorado, in my opinion. We have a lot of acres in this state that we're going to need to bring out of irrigated ag to meet various groundwater requirements and interstate compact requirements. And so how are we kind of developing this and doing the research to know kind of what those benefits are in terms of the ability to reduce water use, and how is that going to impact kind of the bigger water picture in the state, as well as again if we are retiring you know, areas out of kind of irrigated ag, you know, going back to that planning, you know, are those areas that we're considering for, you know, agrivoltaics or something where there's, you know, even if it's not, you know, dry land agriculture after that, is there, you know, are we creating pollinator habitat and doing some of these other beneficial things as we're transitioning that land?
Yeah, I really do think we need a convening of Western agrivoltaics water resource nexus research consortium. That would be, you know, because people are going like this all over the place. It'd be great to figure out everything that's going on.
Fully agree.
Byron, there's an idea for you.
With our last couple of minutes, if each of you for 30 seconds could just tell me what you're excited about, like what's driving you to be interested in this topic area of agrivoltaics.
Honestly, even though I was an environmentalist in college, but have been working in ag for 20 plus years, I think what excites me is like what I said before, is that it seems like both sides of the fence still have an open ear and inquiry about this topic, and there's not closed-mindedness necessarily. So I get excited about that on the political front. And then I get excited just from the farm viability farmer perspective of this, like how can we keep more people farming, give them another economic solution. So those are the two things that kind of drive me to work on this.
I'm going to piggyback off of that and say, you know, what drives me and what excites me about this is I see its potential to be a true win-win. You know, we can achieve our renewable energy targets. We can, you know, keep land and agricultural production, and we can increase the bottom line for our producers.
Yeah, I mean, I come at this conversation with a climate mitigation policy background, and I'm seeing how the clean energy, you know, clean energy deployment targets, we're delaying progress because projects are having a difficult time being built. They're facing community opposition in some cases from environmentalists, but there is a way to deploy clean energy in a way that is compatible with our conservation interests, that's compatible with our agricultural interests. And I think agrivoltaics is a rare opportunity to sort of smooth the pathway towards a version of the clean energy build out that takes into consideration the sort of broader societal interests beyond just reducing greenhouse gases, which includes land conservation and agriculture. So thanks.
Well, thank you all very much, Jordan, Kara, and Duncan. We appreciate you taking your time today to chat with us, and for our viewers, this is recorded. It will be up on our Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center website here in the next weekish. For anybody that was unable to make it to this, you can send it out to them thereafter. We are planning to have another webinar next month, probably at the end of the month, as well as the month after and after that. So I will be sending out an email to all participants to be able to learn about the future opportunities for joining in on these free webinars. Thank you again for your time today, and thanks everybody for your interest.
Thank you.
Have a great week.
Thanks. See you.
Bye.